Shabbat Shalom, and thank you for that very gracious introduction and for your generosity in inviting me to share this special Shabbat with all of you. Holy Blossom is a synagogue with a rich heritage, and I offer my congratulations on the significant milestones that you mark this year. It is a joy for me to reconnect with Rabbi Splansky, having known her family in Cincinnati when I was a rabbinic student. I take pride in her work as your senior rabbi, one of the few women to so serve in North America. And I'm sure that you appreciate her leadership and that of your entire clergy team. In this week's Torah portion, we are reminded that the ancient tabernacle was built because people with willing hearts brought their gifts and their skills. And ever since that time, we know that it is the generosity of the people in sharing what they have that brings God's presence into the sanctuary. Holy Blossom is the synagogue that it is today because the generosity of its members from generation to generation. Each one of us, each one of you, is a piece of priceless mosaic in the design of the universe. Each one has gifts that no one else can bring. I am also honored to be with you as one of your members. Sarah Charney is about to become the first Canadian president of the Women of Reform Judaism. And the Women of Reform Judaism, ever since its founding, have done so much to sustain our movement, whether providing scholarship funds for rabbinic students through the Yes Fund, calling for the ordination of women as far back as 1965, and having the foresight to create the Women's Torah Commentary, an extraordinary volume that continues to enrich all who study Torah and has earned its rightful place next to the Torah commentary written by Holy Blossom's beloved Rabbi, W. Gunther Plaut, Alav HaShalom. On this Shabbat, we complete the book of Exodus with the reading of Vayakel Pekudei, basically a repetition of all the details concerning the building of the ancient tabernacle. I'm sure you have heard it said that God is in the details, but this week's parashah teaches that God is into details. Think of what we have been reading about in our Torah these past few weeks. Every single detail about the building of that ancient tabernacle, detail after detail, over and over again. God likes details, and in so doing reminds us that those who lead should pay attention to details. People are much more willing to volunteer when they feel they can look to their leaders for guidance because they trust their leaders and know that they pay attention to the details of the overall plan in all its complexity. In the Women's Torah Commentary, I was looking at this week's Torah portion, and I found this brief poem to share with Sarah as she embarks upon her new adventure, bringing honor to God, her family, and you, her congregation, and to the Jewish people. It is called At the Tent of Meeting and was written by Sherry Blumber. Finally, after long work, physical and mental, I come to the opening of the tent. I know God, but do you, God, know what this work means? You have always been in my thoughts, always in my mind, and even sometimes in my aching back as I worked and struggled on your behalf. Let the opening of the tent encourage the opening of the text, and let me, your humble daughter, enter and not hold back. May you, Sarah, and all who serve with you, never hold back. And may God bless the work of your hands and the dreams of your heart. Now, as many of you know, the 50th anniversary of my ordination is fast approaching. So this morning, I want to take a few minutes and tell you a little bit more about my journey to the rabbinate, believing as I do that we learn so much from sharing our stories with each other, our own Torah, so to speak. I decided I wanted to be a rabbi when I was 16 years old. Unfortunately, I don't remember why. I do remember always wanting to be a teacher, and whatever my favorite subject was is what I was going to teach. So one year I wanted to be a math teacher, and the next year a teacher of English, and finally a teacher of French. And in the end, I decided to be a teacher of Judaism, which is what a rabbi really is. Fortunately for me, my parents gave me what I consider to be one of the greatest gifts that a parent can give to a child, and that is the courage to dare and to dream. As a result, I remained focused on my goal, unconcerned that no woman had ever been ordained by a theological seminary, and I was determined to succeed despite the doubts I heard expressed in the organized Jewish community. In those days, I did not think very much about being a pioneer or a champion of women's rights. I just wanted to be a rabbi. I began my studies in 1964. As you might imagine, my years in rabbinic school were fraught with challenge. Some members of the college community thought I came to marry a rabbi rather than be one. In fact, once I had been dating one of my fellow students for some time, and a faculty member went up to him and said, "Well, my boy, when are you going to marry her, do the school a favor, and get rid of her?" My sincerity was often suspect, and I was under constant pressure to prove myself. Always, I felt the need to be better and do better than my classmates so that my commitment and my academic ability would not be questioned. Occasionally, I sensed that some people would not be overly upset if I failed. Now, the beauty of the undergraduate program in which I was enrolled was that it allowed me to skip the first year of rabbinic school. And so one day I was in the undergraduate program, and the next day I was in the second year of the rabbinic program. And suddenly people sat up and took notice. Happily, I had the support of Dr. Nelson Glick, at that time president of the College Institute. He gave me his unqualified support and took care of a lot of little problems in the background that I probably never even heard about. Unfortunately, he died the year before I was ordained. But his wife, Helen, a distinguished physician in Cincinnati, told me that he said there were three things he wanted to live to do, and that one of them was to ordain me. Fortunately for me and for all of us, His successor, Dr. Alfred Gottschalk, shared that vision. And when he became president of the College Institute, he made the dream a reality by ordaining me. Only in recent years have I come to understand how bold and daring was that act on his part. Apparently, certain members of the faculty tried to convince him not to ordain me, even though I had only 1 year left. 50 years ago, I did not really understand the amount of pressure he was under, nor did I understand the courage it took for him to step into someone else's shoes and fulfill someone else's mission. How grateful we all are that he was willing to do that and to affirm the equality of women in the Reformed Jewish community. On June 3rd, 1972, he and I stood together before the Ark at the Plum Street Temple in Cincinnati, and he declared publicly that he was ordaining me with pride, dignity, and pleasure. Now, finding a job was not that easy. Some congregations wanted me for my publicity value and to be able to say that they were the first to hire a female rabbi. And others would not talk to me at all. In the end, I was the last person in my class to get a job. But frankly, I got the best job of all, assistant rabbi at the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in New York City. It always seemed particularly appropriate to me that I would come to a synagogue with a reputation for commitment to equality and social justice. Rabbi Edward E. Klein, the senior rabbi at that time, always took great pride in being introduced as the first equal opportunity employer in the American rabbinate. I stayed at the Free Synagogue for 7 years, and to be honest, the circumstances under which I left were not all that pleasant. I hoped I would be given a chance at some point to be the senior rabbi, but that was not to be. Neither that synagogue nor any other was willing at that time to hire a woman as its senior rabbi. Indeed, for 2 years, I was unable to find a full-time position, and I served as a chaplain at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City and a part-time position at Temple Beth El in Elizabeth, New Jersey, a synagogue of older members who were always very warm and welcoming. 1981, I became rabbi of Monmouth Reformed Temple in Tinton Falls, New Jersey, where after 25 years, I retired, becoming Rabbi Emerita. I'm grateful to God that part of my life's work has been to open new doors for women in the Jewish community. But at the same time, I have tried never to lose sight of the larger mission of the Jewish people, which is to derive from the words of Torah a set of values and a sense of holiness that will enable us to be partners with God in completing the world. And what that means from my vantage point is not only participating in the task of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world, but creating a Jewish community based on equality and inclusivity, remembering that all of us are God's children, and we should have the opportunity to fulfill our potential, our creative potential, to the fullest. My experience tells me that we are richer for the gifts that female rabbis and female leaders bring to our shared task. rethinking previous models of leadership, and opening doors to partnership and networking, discovering new models of divinity, knowing that God embodies characteristics both masculine and feminine, training new leaders to be more gender aware by welcoming to our institutions of higher learning respected female scholars able to share with us valuable lessons and insights unique to women, creating new role models, and allowing to be heard, often for the first time, the stories of those whose voices have been silenced for too long, the countless number of women who have enriched humanity from biblical times on. Surely one of the most powerful lessons we have learned from the civil rights movement is that if you do not see someone who looks like you in a position of leadership, then you begin to feel left out. You have a sense that it cannot be done. We teach our daughters and our sons that everything is possible. There are no limits on what they can achieve when seeking to fulfill their creative potential and contribute to the vitality of Jewish life. But sometimes when they interact with others, they discover a different message, a message that continues to exist in the larger society of which we are a part, a reluctance to believe that women are as competent and capable as men. For decades now, we have been trying to change that attitude in every field of endeavor: medicine, law, accounting, education, even politics. For the sake of our survival, we need to continue to work to change that in the religious community as well, to make certain that our daughters and granddaughters can be whatever they want to be, and that they have not only equal pay, but equal opportunity, and that they are free from all forms of sexual harassment. We are grateful to the Women of Reform Judaism and their executive director, Rabbi Marla Feldman, for the leadership and advocacy they continue to provide on behalf of these social issues and so many others. Now, people often think that I am the first woman rabbi in the world, but that honor belongs to a woman named Regina Jonas, whose story I share with you now and with which I conclude. She studied for the rabbinate in Berlin, but the professor who was her mentor died the year before she was ordained, and the seminary refused to follow through with her ordination, even though she had completed all of the requirements, including a thesis entitled, "Can Women Serve as Rabbis?" She was forced to wait until 1935, when she was ordained privately by Rabbi Max Dienemann, president of the Association of Liberal Rabbis in Berlin. At first, she was permitted only to work in schools, hospitals, and homes for the elderly. But as rabbis began to emigrate or be deported because of the Holocaust, she was invited to preach and fulfill rabbinic duties at various synagogues, gaining a reputation for her pastoral work and preaching ability. A few years ago, I had the privilege of visiting Berlin and following in her footsteps, together with a group of rabbis, historians, and lay people under the direction of Dr. Gary Zola, the American Jewish Archives, and Dr. Gail Reamer from the Jewish Women's Archive. It was our intention to go to Terezin and to present and to dedicate a plaque in her memory. It was an absolutely amazing experience, and I was quite shaken by the number of similarities between my life and that of Regina Jonas. She did not see herself as a pioneer or a famous person, neither did I. I just wanted to be a rabbi, and so did she. Both of us shared a similar vision of feminism. That is, all people should be given the opportunity to fulfill their God-given potential to the fullest. Her mentor died the year before she was ordained, and so did mine. In her case, the seminary refused to follow through, even though she had completed all the requirements. In my case, those who tried to stop my ordination were unsuccessful. I was always held to a higher standard, and so was she. And often male rabbis and lay leaders told me to be patient, a word with which she was also familiar. She did not think a female rabbi should marry and have children. It would be too difficult. And ultimately, I came to the same decision, believing I myself would never be able to do both and do them well. She loved to preach and teach. In Terezin, we found papers on which she had written the titles of her lectures: Women in Judaism, Women at the Bible, etc. All topics that I and all women rabbis have spoken about. Before being deported to Terezin, Rabbi Jonas gave her documents to the Berlin Jewish community for safekeeping. Had she not done so, we would know even less than we do now about her life and the significant contributions she made to the Jewish community, which continue to bear fruit even today. Not really realizing that I was following in her footsteps, I announced several years ago that I would give all my documents and papers to the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati. And I invited all female rabbis of whatever denomination to do the same, so that those doing research on the history of women in the rabbinate can come to one place and find what they need. When we were in Berlin, we had an opportunity to see her papers, which had remained hidden until after the Berlin Wall, which is probably why we only heard about her more recently. Words cannot really express the emotions I felt when the archivist brought out this small box of papers, all the papers, all we have left of Rabbi Regina Jonas. At Terezin, we dedicated a plaque in her memory, ensuring that she would never again be forgotten. And at the dedication ceremony, I read these words written by her, which seem so appropriate for today. Remember, they were written in the 1930s. I hope a time will come for all of us in which there will be no more questions on the subject of woman. For as long as there are questions, something is wrong. But if I must say what drove me as a woman to become a rabbi, two elements come to mind. my belief in the godly calling, and my love for people. God has placed abilities and callings in all our hearts without regard to gender. Thus, each of us has the duty, whether man or woman, to realize those gifts God has given. And if you look at things this way, one takes woman and man for what they are, human beings. As I think about Rabbi Jonas, one of the things I admire most about her is that she chose the well-being of her people over her own self-interest. She could have escaped the horrors of the Holocaust, but she chose instead to accompany her people to the concentration camps, to continue to minister to their needs, and to help them find meaning and purpose in the values of Jewish tradition. We cannot help but stand in awe of her courage. We returned from our journey prepared to tell her story, to ensure that she is given her rightful place in the chain of Jewish tradition that binds together all the generations of our people, past, present, and future, and determined to make certain that her yard site would be observed from year to year in synagogues of all denominations. Now, the actual date of her death is unknown, but with the help of the Holocaust Museum in Washington and Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, we determined that she was taken from Terezin together with her mother on October 12, 1944. Her name appears on the transport list. And she arrived in Auschwitz on October 14, 1944, where it is assumed that she was murdered that very day, which happened to be Shabbat Bereshit, the first Shabbat of the Jewish year. Therefore, we have chosen Shabbat Bereshit as the date of her yard site, and we hope that next fall you will join us in saying Kaddish for her. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share her story. I like to think that whenever we do so, we bring honor to her memory, because in a very real sense, all female rabbis and all female leaders of our people stand on her shoulders. And in working together, we make it possible for the larger Jewish community, of which we are a part, to embrace and welcome the next generation of women who will strengthen our tradition and bring the gifts of heart, mind, and spirit to create the holy places where our people gather to bring God's presence into the world. Ken Yehi Ratzon, may it be God's will and ours. Amen.